Hey developers, what's the difference between reactive and ref? What is this reactivity transform, and how do we deal reactivity inside our Vue 3 application? So you can look in the description, I'll have links if you want to jump around, but basically we're gonna look at ref, reactive, what's the difference, and we're gonna jump in some code, so I think you're gonna learn a lot. Make sure you watch all the way to the end. Hey, and if you like this video, make sure you click that like button, and if you like this is my new Lego set that I just created. Yeah, if you can leave a comment about that, that'd be awesome. I think it looks kind of cool. I don't know. Okay, so I have inside here, this will be my online editor. I'm using the Vue single file component playground, which is at sfc.vuejs.org. And I thought I'd just play around here, and let's first take a look at what ref does and what reactive does. So inside the script setup here, we know if we just create, let's say, a variable called message, and we call it hello world. If we use the double curly brackets and we do message here, it shows up. Kind of as we expected, that makes a lot of sense. But if we wanted to change this and make it reactive, in other words, that way if things change inside our script tag, it also changes inside the template, then we have a problem. So if I'm just gonna make an on-click handler here, and this is just gonna do message equals new world. And we know that we can create a button, and inside this button we're gonna have it, I don't know, just called change, and we'll have an @click handler, and this click handler we'll call this on click. So if we click this button here, it's not doing anything. You still see it says hello world. So since we're using script setup, we're not using the options API. Remember, if you're using options API, you would use this data object and use this export default. We need to use something else. So this is where we can import in ref. So to do that, we do import ref from Vue. And now if we surround this by ref and you go like this, now this message, it's actually a .value, so you have to use a .value afterwards. And if we do this and click change, it now is reactive. So that way we can change it inside the template. If we change inside the script setup, it updates in the template. And that's basically how ref works. Now ref can be a primitive like a string. It could also just be a number if we wanted it to be. So we can just make it, I don't know, 10, and same thing works. You can actually have it be an object as well. So if we want it to be, I don't know, we can have this called value equals 10 here. And now you can see here it's just printing out value 10. So I could do message dot, instead of calling value, that's kind of confusing. Let's call it message dot num. So if we call message dot num here, you can see it shows 10. You can change it. Now this message dot value is now just changing it. It completely reassigns it to new world. So if we wanted to kind of do this the right way, we'd have to change this to an object, but we won't do that right this second. So this is pretty straightforward. Now there is a new way of handling this. One thing that I really bothered about is using this dot value everywhere, because it's really easy to forget. If you're using Volar, which is a extension inside Visual Studio Code, it automatically just adds this dot value to everything, which makes it a little bit easier if you're using any of these reactive variables. What you can use is there's this new Reactivity Transform, which is an experimental feature that you can opt into. So if you're gonna use this in your own applications, if you're using Vue, you just add Reactivity Transform true, like you can see down here. If you're using Vue CLI, you can also add it to this config and module chain webpack. But once you do that, you can actually have options to use these compiler time macros. So instead, you don't have to import any of this in. Instead of being able to do, let's just change this back to 10. And then if we change this back to message here, you can see now it changes to new world. If I put a $sign here, I no longer have to put dot value in. So anytime I refer to message here and I click it, it just works. So if I keep the dot value here, it's not gonna work. But if I take the value out, then it works. So now I'm back to new world. So that's kind of a nice little trick there. I believe this will be turned on in newer versions of Vue. I think you have to have 3.2.5 or later to use this experimental function. But I'm almost certain 2023, they're just going to turn this on for everybody. But it just makes it a little bit easier. Now let's take a look at reactive. So instead of doing ref here, I'm going to add in reactive. And I'm going to just take this $sign out. And I'm going to make this reactive. Now one thing with reactive, you can see reactive is actually only an object. So you can't really put primitives in here. It doesn't really work. So if I do message.value here, like this doesn't really work or anything. But it's really meant for reactive objects. So if I put here and I put num equals 10, and you can do message.num here, you see it definitely works. Now if you want to change it, you would have to change message.num to equals new world, and then it works. So you can't do wholesale reassignments like this, like you can do with ref. So this doesn't work. You would actually get an error in the console. So that's a little bit of differences. So ref can be an object, an array, it can be a primitive, while reactive is just objects or arrays. So in this case, we have num10 here. We have a message equals new world. So other than it can't be reassigned, it can't be a primitive, there's another couple of little bit differences if you're using reactive over ref. So let's come back over here. I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it usename.js. And what this is going to do is we're going to import in ref and reactive from Vue. And we're going to export a function called useSuperHero. So it's just going to export a superhero name. So I'm going to create something called name here, and this is going to be reactive, and it's going to have a first, which is Jim, and it's going to have a last, which is going to be Gordon. And you can see here, that's it. And then we're just going to have it return the name. And now we should be able to import this in here. So inside our main one, we're going to import in, and since we call it useSuperHero, probably should be the same name, but that's fine for now. useSuperHero from /usename.js. Cool. Now, if you wanted to grab the information out of here, you could see that this is reactive as the first and last name. We can try to destructure it out. And this is something you do all the time in software development, especially in React programming, is you always destructure stuff out. So if I want to const, and I want to get the first and last name out, and that's from the useSuperHero. So now we have access to the first and last, and if we look at it inside here, I'm just going to get rid of this. I'll put double curly brackets first. You can see here's the first name, and if I put double curly brackets last, here's the last name. But one thing you'll notice right away is that it's not reactive. So I'm going to come back over here, and I'm just going to put some double curly brackets here. And if I do first equals Bob, and we'll make this a let for now, and last equals test, and I hit this, you can see it's not doing anything. In fact, if we looked inside the console, we would see an error because this first and last is not reactive at all. So we've kind of lost the reactivity of this because we're destructuring a reactive. And that's one thing you have to realize with reactive. And so if we want to bring reactivity back in, we can use something called toRefs. So I can bring toRefs in. And then if I surround this toRefs from this useSuperHero, it basically like converts it back into a ref. So if you can see, it still doesn't work. But now if I do first.value and last.value, and I hit click change here, now it works. So basically adds the reactivity back in, and now it's basically makes them refs. So you can do first.value and last.value, which is pretty neat. And if we didn't want to use the .value, since these are basically refs, we can surround it by this question mark again, and then you can get rid of .value. And if hit change, it works now because basically this converts it back without the value, but they're still reactive. So that's pretty interesting. But if you look at the official Vue documentation, they recommend using the ref value. So let's take a look how refs would work if you're using a composable like this. Okay, so I'm back inside my composable here that I've created called usename. And instead of using reactive here, I'm going to add in ref. And we're going to call this first. And we'll call this Jim. And we'll do last equals ref Gordon. And then instead of just returning one thing. We're going to return an object with the first and last. And by the way, this is just shorthand for doing first, last, like this. So now we've passed in two refs back outside of this composable. So this obviously is wrong. So we're going to go like this for use superhero. Now, if you destructure it like this, I'm going to get rid of this. You can see it definitely works right off the bat. You're seeing first and last here. And if we try to do it though, if we do first.value, last.value, and we hit change, it works. So this is actually a little bit easier than using reactive. We don't have to use those toRefs. We don't have to do anything like that. It just kind of works everything as you expect it right out of the box. But you may be wondering, hey, I just showed you this really cool way using Reactivity Transform. What happens if I use that inside a composable? So let's say for some reason that you wanted to use that here inside the Reactivity Transform, using this everywhere. So you do $ref here, $ref here, and now you're still returning first and last. So it's back to Jim Gordon. If you click change, it actually doesn't work. It actually gives you an error that this value doesn't have, there's no dot value on this first and last. Because what's happening when you do this $ref, it's basically returning first dot value and last dot value. So it's just returning that string. There's no dot value on it. So you may run into this instance where like, well, now what do I do here? I'm returning these values. I can't use $ref because what happens if later if I want to just do first equals Bob or something like that, and you didn't want to have to do dot value everywhere, you're kind of in this problem. So what you can do is you can kind of convert it back over again. So what you would do is you can put $, and surround the whole object. And that'll basically add the reactivity in. So anytime you're like passing something from one object or from one file to the other and you're returning things and you're using this reactivity and using these compile macros for the reactivity transform, make sure you use this $. So now if I do that, come back here, it's working as we expected again, which is pretty neat. But then again, you're thinking, well, once if I want to get rid of dot value here, well, you can add it back in here. So I can put $, here, and now I can get rid of dot value. I'm destructuring. Reactivity still works. Everything still works. So this is the recommended way of doing it inside. Anytime you use composables, this can be like a really easy store. Let's say you wanted to create a quick store inside your Vue app and you were trying to pass and save information between multiple components. You can use this ref and reactive to do it. And this makes it just kind of easier to work with so you don't have to use dot value everywhere. I'll also keep in mind this reactivity transform. I'm only showing you examples using ref, but it's actually available for computed, shallow ref, custom ref, and toRef. And those are all instances where you have to use that dot value everywhere. So it's very, very interesting and helps a lot. It also works with TypeScript. I'm not going to go into all the details, but I'll leave a link to this in the notes. So this is really interesting. So this goes back to the last question we had at the beginning. What would I recommend? I really like ref. Ref works great everywhere. So does reactive. I don't really have a huge personal opinion on it. I guess if you want the simplest way, use ref everywhere since it supports objects, arrays, and everything. And it works great if you're importing it or using composables. If you're in a very simple project and you have a lot of data, reactive works great as well, and then you don't have to use these compile macros and you don't have to use dot value everywhere. So that could be an option too. I don't know. I don't have a big personal opinion. I leave a comment below with what you think the best way of doing this is. I hope you guys learned something. This is really interesting, the direction Vue is going. I really appreciate it, and make sure you share this with someone if this was helpful for you. Thanks.